Fantasy Sports Corp and Underdog Fantasy have teamed up to start your fantasy season off in the win column with Best Ball. What is Best Ball? It's quite simply the easiest way to win. No team management, no trades, no waivers. It's their biggest contest ever and it has only gotten bigger. You simply have to sit and win. You don't even have to set your lineup. Always get your best score every week. Just enter a contest, draft your team, and Underdog will do the rest. What could make this even better? How about free money, up to $100 using our exclusive promo code? Go online now and use the promo code INJUREDLIST to double your deposit up to $100. You tell them Gingerbread sent you. Good girl.
Special shout out to today's episode to SeatGeek. We recently partnered with them to become a brand ambassador. What does that mean? Well, for you, it means you get a special discount when you make your first ticket purchase with SeatGeek. With my code INJUREDLISTPOD, you will get $20 off your first purchase with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a ticket purchasing app that takes all the confusion out of buying tickets to your favorite sports, concert events, and more. They score each ticket on a scale of 1 to 10 to help you know if you're getting a good deal. Green is good, red is bad. My followers get $20 off their first ticket purchase using my code INJUREDLISTPOD. Click on the link in the show notes and browse for your favorite events. Your next big night ever is waiting, and they have the tickets.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of the Injured List podcast, Brian Scott.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Injured List podcast. Your host, Brian Scott. Thank you for joining me once again. Another great episode, and of course, another great guest, Mr. Jeremy Swick, otherwise known as the Average Historian. He's got a passion for history, education, and social media, and he's a rugby player. He's worked at the Football Hall of Fames, plural. And he's the owner of his own media company, and he's going to join us right now and discuss his background and his current situation and a little bit different topics than we're used to here on the podcast, but it's always good to mix it up and change it up a little bit. So let me welcome to the stage, Mr. Jeremy Swick.
Brian, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, the pleasure's all mine, dude. Thanks for joining us. It's been a process in the making here, as we got a little bit of a hiccup when we tried to schedule the first recording of this, but we were able to iron everything out, and here we are. So let's get into it, my man. A rugby player. Everybody on my podcast does something in and around the world of sports or is an athlete in and of themselves. Ironically, I've had 2 other rugby players on my podcast. I seem to have a propensity to bring in rugby players. So tell me a little bit more about your background, where you come from, how you got into rugby.
Yeah, so just starting with the rugby, I actually was able to play my senior year of high school, which, thinking back about 14 years ago, I just realized this is my 14th season playing. Played in college as an undergraduate and a graduate student. And then from there, I actually transitioned to various men's leagues across the country. Basically, I realized that since I was out of college, I was moving for different jobs in my field. I wanted something to stay busy and stay active. So I realized if I just join a rugby team wherever I move to, I get about 40 instant friends. You end up really clicking with, hopefully the whole team, but at least that gives you something to do, some friends to hang out with. And no matter where I was living, everywhere from Akron, Ohio to Hopkins, Minnesota, I just found that connection, of course, Atlanta, Georgia as well. And I actually have a game tomorrow on Saturday. So again, looking forward to it. Just love playing, and I want to play as long as I can.
Yeah, it's a tough sport for sure. It's basically football on steroids without the pads. That's the way I look at it. You got to have a certain mentality to be willing to run through a pile of guys without basically any protection whatsoever. So you mentioned that you gain a lot of friends, and I've often thought that the rugby world is much like a fraternity. Where I went to school, it was a club sport, and in most colleges across the country, it is. Was that the case where you were?
Yes, it sure was. It was a club sport at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire.
And were you able to have access to a lot of the healthcare on campus with regards to like the sports medicine facilities and training staff and whatnot?
Yes, I mean we always were able to book a trainer. I mean it was a smaller Division 3 school, but I feel like if we needed help, we could get it. Definitely, we weren't considered a varsity team by any stretch of the imagination. But when we had resources, we needed it, or we had resources, we could get it. We had a lot of people in kind of those fields already on our team, which always helps with, diagnosing injuries or just talking about things like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's always good to have a colleague or a teammate who knows a little bit about the profession. So now you majored in art, you majored in history, if I'm not mistaken, or if I don't have that right, please correct me. But you used that background and those degrees and ended up becoming a historian in not one, but two football Hall of Fames. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in that and what your role was?
Yeah, so it's kind of winding a long story. A long story short, my undergrad was in history. I was going to be a teacher, education, social studies. I really had a I think everyone, if you go into history, you end up having that favorite high school social studies or middle school social studies history teacher that you really kind of like, maybe emulate. And so my original plan was to be a teacher. And once I started getting into it and kind of had the opportunity to pivot, I decided to go to grad school at Eau Claire as well. And that's where I earned my master's in public history to do museum work. Now, we had about the football museums, and I was fortunate at Eau Claire. Brent Hensel, who now is actually the current curator for the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame, went to Eau Claire about 10 years prior to I did. And our professors saw saw me that I was on a very similar path towards my interests and just what I kind of gravitated towards. I actually ended up writing my master's thesis on college football stadiums in the 1920s, looking at stadiums at Illinois, Minnesota, and Indiana, the memorial stadiums. And so through that, I actually had the opportunity to intern at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2016, where being a kid from Wisconsin, it was the same year as Brett Favre's induction to the Hall of Fame. So I remember as a intern, I didn't think it could ever get any cooler. That would be the pinnacle of not my career, maybe, but those experiences.
Sure.
Now we fast forward a little while, and in 2018, I was offered and accepted the position as the historian and curator at the College Football Hall of Fame down in Atlanta.
Awesome. So how long did you spend there?
So I was there for just over 4 years, and it was such an incredible experience. I had the opportunity to do ESPN, be on CNN, talk with national news outlets on a regular basis, do print, do interviews, and it just kind of continued my love and interest and really kind of gravitated towards the digital space, which I didn't think as a museum professional that really would have been the trend. But having all those opportunities, it was one of those times where I think I was like a sponge. I tried to soak in every experience and every opportunity I could get.
That's yeah. I noticed at the so as part of the Fantasy Sports Corps, which is the group I belong to, we were down at the Football Hall of Fame in Canton back beginning of August, and that was my first time there. And it was an awesome experience. We were able to get a free ticket into the Hall of Fame as part of the expo that we were part of, which was the National Fantasy Football Expo, which is becoming a bigger and bigger event every year. This was the first year I attended, and I could see a lot of the technology implemented at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That one really cool virtual reality locker room experience where Vince Lombardi comes out and talks to you. That was pretty sick. It felt like you were really, really in the room with them. It was really cool. So I can see where that stuff is kind of headed toward that digital age. So what was like a day in the life of being a museum curator for the College Football Hall of Fame and your time at the Pro Football Hall of Fame? Did you have to handle and coordinate with getting a lot of the memorabilia? Did you deal with the athletes as well that were inductees and stuff?
So it was great at the Pro Football Hall of Fame where I first started. It was during the induction season, which is the summer, and we always have to reach out to the players. And I think at that point, I didn't really do the reaching out when I was at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It was kind of our supervisor Christy Davis and Jason Atkins, who did the main reaching out. But it was funny because, of course, someone like Favre had a ton of memorabilia, sent it in. We kind of did one of those mock locker rooms as a display. Well, of course, and I learned this, and this definitely came in handy when I was at the College Football Hall of Fame. A lot of players, good, better, and different, almost everyone has an ego. And I think some of that is what got them to the level of superstar status that they ended up being at. And so I remember a story. We had Marvin Harrison in that class as well with Favre. And his locker was pretty bare. And I remember they reached back out to him and was kind of say, hey, you're going to be next to Favre. And so we'd really hate to see Colts fans come through and see your locker nearly empty. The next thing you know, we're getting his high school track shoes where he won like 4 state championships. He calls and asks if he can like bring his Indy car because he was like a part owner in an Indy, in an Indy car company or whatever. And of course, that kind of jumped the gun. But it just made me laugh. And so when I was at the College Football Hall of Fame, part of the job every year is doing the induction ceremony. And at that point, I was the one reaching out to the players, and I kind of took that little piece of information, put it back in my brain. And of course, some players just have more, some more interested. And I always give him props whenever I talk to him about it. But Torrey Holt, he was one of the first guys I really worked with for his induction. And he's asking me, kind of what we're looking for. And I explain. And of course, a couple weeks later, I mean, he had everything from almost all his jerseys to back then, instead of like a big old fancy locker room, you had your stool. So he sent in his broken, busted down stool. And I still talk to Tori to this day about it. And it was just really cool to see someone lend us all those things. And just, again, that helped me later on when I talked to the other players in that class. I'm like, hey, Tori sent a lot of stuff, and here it all is. We don't want you guys to feel like you're not represented, because at that point, then it's just on them if their locker or their space looks bare,
Yeah. Well, did you ever encounter that where you had a player that just didn't have a lot of stuff and was just like, that's all I got, take it or leave it kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's funny you mention that. At times, especially when you go farther and farther back with some of the players, it's not the same amount of memorabilia. Sometimes it's 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so a lot of times when they, respond and tell us, hey, we don't have a lot of stuff, that's when I started and continue to develop relationships with the universities themselves. Hey, player XYZ is being inducted. We reached out to him. Either they might not be responsive, or they just tell us they don't really have any kind of memorabilia like that to display. A lot of times the university will help out and maybe send a replica helmet or a throwback jersey that would be something kind of like what the player would have worn. And so it was great, developing those relationships with the schools, with the players. And sometimes it was fans that I knew maybe had someone's jersey. Hey, can we borrow this for, 8, 9 months or whatever it may be. And it kind of goes into the day to day at the College Football Hall of Fame. I always joked it was kind of like a episode, I'd say a combination of Pawn Stars and American Pickers, because you really never knew what someone would call and reach out about. I remember I had Jay Berlanger's childhood lifetime scrapbook from one of the family members that donated it. I never thought I'd see the first Heisman Trophy winner in diapers.
That's pretty awesome. I wonder, so if you weren't getting it from family members or the athletes themselves, did you guys have to get that stuff authenticated? And if you did, who did you have to go through to get that, to make that happen?
So a lot of times it was us authenticating it, going back in the record books, or doing the game, doing the game by game, looking through programs and trying to do the best we can with it. Of course, when it comes directly from the player, that gives a little more credence, but I always wanted to make sure I was very sure if I was going to call something a game used item, even though it's just going on the little exhibit tab. For me personally, it was okay. I can't confirm this was actually game used. It looks similar, but there's maybe the stitching's different, or so a lot of times it would end up me being game issued or game ready. I never wanted to mislead anyone to thinking that it was a game used item and maybe it wasn't. And so a lot of times it came back to researching ourselves and really digging through. Usually if it was newer players, I mean, a lot of times I remember when I think Illinois and Penn State went into that like 6 overtime game. I was sitting there watching the game with my buddy, my rugby team actually, and on Saturday I'm like, oh, while this game's going on, I reached out to both um, equipment managers and was like, hey, whatever happens this game, this is a great game. We would love some stuff from this. If I didn't know them already, I'd introduce myself. And of course, that Sunday, Monday, the programs are coming. Some of the gloves. I think we got the game ball, and it's for me again. It goes back to that social media. It's in that real time. I realized with more modern players, actually, it was me DMing them on Instagram. I remember Jackson He, who was one of the first, not the first, one of the first Chinese-born players, and the first to have his Chinese name on the back of his jersey. I DM'd him. I remember I DM'd Sarah Fuller when she was the first woman to play in the Power 5 games. And sometimes the school would reach out and make sure it was legit and not just some random person. But I realized a lot with the social media background, that's how you get to a lot of these players and even coaches now. It's not sending an email to the school that gets passed and bounced around. And, by the time I get an answer, I seen how many people have been CC'd on this message. I'm like, let me just reach out to the player or the coach or even the team pages sometimes. And so, like I said, it was never the same day. So some days it'd be designing the exhibits and we'd be pen and paper and I'd be drawing what I wanted to look like.
Yeah.
Other days it might be going around and seeing what exhibits were up or were down. At the College Football Hall of Fame, we had a giant helmet wall with 775. The number always changes, of every Division 1 through NAIA school, and each helmet would light up based on attendance that day. So as you signed in, we'd use like an RFID chip, and the fan or the guest would be able to pick their school, and that helmet would stay lit up throughout the day. And so at the end of the day, you'd get your usual Georgias and all that. But I remember I see Eau Claire, University of Wisconsin Eau Claire's helmet lit up. And I realize that they're still in the building, and I go talk to them, and I think I end up giving them, a little behind the scenes tour, just that I was
Nice.
excited to see a Division 3 school that I went to up
Yep.
and lit up,
That's awesome. I've yet to be to the College Football Hall of Fame. I'll have to make a drive down there. Not too far from me. I'm here in Charlotte, North Carolina, so it's not a terrible drive. So
Yep.
so of all your time doing that, I imagine you've amassed quite the Rolodex of former players, current players, and whatnot. Was there any one particular piece of memorabilia that kind of sticks out in your mind as this is like the holy grail, or this is my thing? If I could, save and curate any one item from all these museums and stuff that I've been a part of, this would be it. Is there anyone that kind of strikes you from the world of sport anyway that
Yeah,
thinks back?
absolutely. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I kind of have the go-to. So growing up, I collected football cards, and you can see, if you're watching, you can see the background behind me. I collect a lot of sports stuff. One of those is cards. And I remember this man reached out to me. This was right before the pandemic. Hey, I'm, getting older and I'm not really able to keep on to a lot of these things. And do you have any interest in my 1955 Topps All American football cards? And of course, if you don't know about those, it's 90 of the 100 players are college football Hall of Famers.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
88 of the, excuse me, 88 of them were alive in 1955. 12 had passed already.
Oh wow. Okay.
This man had 79 of the 88 possible signed by the
Wow.
players. And of course, I'm now digging into understanding how he has this incredible collection. It turns out he grew up in the Bronx in, the 50s. And he realized that living in New York, he couldn't get the home team a whole lot to sign. But back then, the players would take a cab or maybe a bus to and from the team hotels at, Yankee Stadium, for example, because he did the same thing with the baseball cards. He would go as a kid and get all of them signed. And of course, we're talking, and he's still kind of deciding what he wants to do with them. He clearly made it clear he did not have an interest in selling them. But I'm like, until you see how much they might be worth, no one wants to sell anything until they start to take a look. And I remember, of course, it's February of 2020. March comes around and the world's on fire at that point. And I am still calling this guy every other week. At one point, I think we were furloughed for about a month or two. And I'm still calling this guy every other week just to check in to see how he's doing. And, because I knew it would be such an incredible collection. And
Yeah.
I learned as a curator, you never tell people your stuff is going to go on display permanently. And you just can't because of how many items you get at almost any museum. It's probably 8 to maybe 5 to 8% of the actual collection is what's on display. The rest are stored securely in the archives. He's the first guy and the only guy, and I've worked at 5 museums now. He's the only guy I told, if you give these to us, it's going on display. I can tell you exactly where it is, where it's going to go on display. And I was like, mark my words, it's going to happen. And eventually, about 9 months later, he donates them. And I just remember getting that package, and there's a card of the 4 Horsemen of Notre Dame, all 4 of them signed. We didn't really even need to authenticate them. Of course, it could have been sent to a place like PSA, but I mean, at that point, we were very confident in all the cards, and especially with them being donated in that sense, it was another way to authenticate them. And he did the same thing for the 1952 baseball set. So the Mickey Mantle, Roberto Clemente, Clemente was 55, but Jackie Robinson, all those guys donated to the Baseball Hall of Fame. He then also donates this 1948-52 exhibit football card set, black and white cards. They're famous for being the first cards that were really just given as cards or sold as cards. Before that, it was a lot of premium free items. You buy tobacco, you buy cigarettes, you buy gum. That's how you get your card. These were just in slot machines, and it was just another. That was probably one of my favorite items. The 4 Horsemen was my favorite card, but it was just cool to get an entire, almost 100 card set.
That is an awesome story, and I'm sure that dude could probably rattle off the dates and the locations that he got all of them signed. So I'm sure you wouldn't have to, think long and hard about authenticating them after you're talking with him.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that he had some baseball stuff. Was there any cross collaboration between the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the College Football Hall of Fame, and any of the other sports when it came to looking for advice or helping curate stuff or obtain things? Did you guys ever kind of work together?
Yes, it's funny you mentioned that. You think this world's huge, and it actually becomes pretty small when you get something that niche. A lot of us know each other, or we've heard the names, or we've met each other at the conferences. Actually, one of the most recent interns at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, he had reached out to me to do a podcast interview, several months, last year at some point, or maybe 2 years ago. And I remember he had applied for the intern position, similar to what I had when I was at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And it was just a reason to, again, reach out to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, just like, hey, this guy's coming through. He's a good guy. Definitely give him some consideration and all that. But we always talked. We would always, you have a question, you reach out, you put it in we had like a group email, it's literally like a Hall of Fame email, and just bounce ideas, everything from what happens when we don't have paperwork filed properly and a family wants their item back and we can't prove, it's ours or theirs,
Yep.
or, induction procedures or how to make it better, and, tips and tricks you learn. So it's definitely a really cool network of people. I realize even just working in museums in general, you reach out to a museum that, let's say I'm going to New Orleans, I might reach out to one of the museums there. I might want to visit, and it's another opportunity to network and bounce ideas off each other, because I think as museum professionals, we like to share what we have, we like to share what we know, and it's great to have a listening ear who actually gets what you're saying. Not just your friends and family are like, oh, that's nice. We don't really know what you're saying at this point, but you like it, so
Yep.
we love it for you. It's nice to kind of get those deep ideas out of your brain, I guess.
Yeah, I'd love to sit at a bar, maybe over a drink or two and a cocktail, and with you guys, and kind of listen in on some of the stories. I'm sure there's some really cool ones that you guys share amongst each other that maybe we never get to hear. So
Absolutely.
I'll have to talk to you when we're done recording. I got an old baseball that supposedly was signed by the Dodgers at some point, I think in 55 or 56.
Okay.
And I got it from an uncle who lived in Queens, who did much like the same thing that you mentioned, that gentleman from the Bronx, where he was an avid baseball fan and got a lot of old programs and things from his days in Flushing, Queens, growing up not too far from where the Mets ended up playing, and at Shea Stadium. I'll have to get your information on who to contact over there at the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's another conversation for later. There was another question I wanted to ask. Okay, so you talked about the sports stuff. Was there ever or I should say, was there ever a period in time during your time at the Sports Hall of Fames where you got an object or something that was, memorabilia that really was odd and kind of struck you as odd, and maybe even didn't at all have anything to do with sports, but because it was attached to something in or sports or an athlete, that it became part of the collection and you had to curate it and organize it and display it?
Well, that's a good one. I'm trying to think. Nothing too out of the ordinary. At times it would be something like, I'm trying to think. Actually, I don't really have anything that comes to mind that was super out of the ordinary. I mean, for example, I think the scrapbook was pretty out there. That, it didn't have a whole lot to do with the football. It was funny because it kind of mentioned his career, but it was a lot more of his life than
More like family photos and stuff?
Oh yeah, it was almost all family photos, and literally like a little tiny section of his time in college at that point, because he didn't even play in the pros. It was
Yeah.
like him getting married and kids and all that stuff. And so, a lot of times with that, but I think one of it is that when I was there, you always want to be real objective about what you're getting and what you're saying yes and no to.
Yeah.
There'd be times where maybe I come, get offered to go and visit a site or something like that, and I realize this is probably nothing that we really want or need, or someone to reach out and they have like old newspaper clippings. And at times it'd be like, you know what, this probably maybe belongs in your family. Maybe you guys would really like to cherish and, hang on to it. Or, hey, we would love to get some scans of these newspapers, but you guys can actually keep the physical ones. Because you're always fighting. It's like a 3D game of Tetris in the archives. You're trying to make as much as you possibly have fit in the smallest cubic foot you possibly can. So
Yeah.
a lot of it was being aware of already what we could and couldn't take. A lot of people love donating books. And the way I would get them, we had several hundred, maybe, probably almost 1,000 different books about football at the College Football Hall of Fame. But people would say, "Oh, I have a ton of books for you." I'm like, "Okay, can you give me a list of the titles?" Because we wanted to make sure that we didn't have them. We don't need 17 copies of, one
Right.
book, as great as that might be. And usually that would kind of scare them away because they just wanted to get rid of it more than, go through it. But
Yeah,
it was definitely being tactful about what we would and would not accept.
sure. Was there anything looking back that you turned away that maybe you like, oh man, I wish I had the opportunity to get my hands on that again. I can't.
Ooh, I don't think so. I don't think so. Because a lot of times it was just stuff I don't think anyone really wanted. Or okay, this is a good example. And I can't think of his name. His last name's Adams. He played for the Patriots in the 70s. There was a couple game balls that were really cool. And we actually took them, but I didn't even process them into our collection. I called them, I knew the guy up at the Patriots Hall of Fame at the time and the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I reached out to the Patriots guy first, and he was like, "Oh yeah, we would take them." And so it literally went from them. I think I maybe signed like a transfer paper and sent them right up there because it was cool, but it was nothing that had to do with anything, the College Football Hall of Fame, the college experience. So
Right.
again, it goes back to that networking and knowing each other. I remember, I think it was the baseball hall. They had one of those lifetime pass tickets for football for one of the football stadiums, and they sent them, just sent them to us. Hey, we think you guys. It's been in our collection. We've never processed it. Everyone has everyone has like a table or a shelf of stuff they just kind of. That's for the next guy in 20 years. We just kind of you just kind of keep pushing it down the
Yep.
down the way.
I think we all have one of those closets in our house.
Exactly.
Maybe a space in the garage too, or the attic. So if there was one piece of memorabilia while you were in the Pro Football Hall of Fame or the College Football Hall of Fame that you would love to get that maybe you never came across or that you've been searching for your entire career, anything like that you can think of?
So it's really a stuff of lore, but it is the first Akron Pros championship trophy. I believe 1920, I want to say. The Akron Pros won the championship even before the NFL. And there's like a picture of the trophy, but it disappeared almost instantly.
Really?
And
Okay.
it's one of those white whales, holy grails. It probably had been destroyed. I would guess, probably 1921, 1920, but no one's ever seen it. And it's definitely worth looking up to see. It's just one of those that it'd be so cool to find or have or something like that.
Were there pictures of that in the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
I believe there may have been pictures. I don't know
Yeah.
if they had them on display, but I'm thinking I vividly think of there's a newspaper that has them hoisting up the trophy, and
Okay.
that's like the last anyone's ever seen of it.
For all we know, they might have melted it down and sold it for money in the Depression or something.
Exactly. I mean, it's just one of those things. I always do laugh that Jay Berwanger's Heisman was used as a doorstop as well.
Was it pretty beat up?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was pretty. We don't have it,
Really?
but it was definitely one of those pretty beat up from what I've heard.
Yeah, you wonder what some of these people do with these things when they take them home.
They
Well, that's
go
awesome,
in,
man. Some
some
great
of them go in
stories.
junk drawers, some of them go in garages. I've learned, it's funny because I think a lot of times that life happens, life moves on. That was
Sure.
really, especially in the college, it was 3 to 4 years to 2 years of their life, and
Yeah.
priorities change. So a lot of times it's like, and I think some players get ready to kind of move on from that and maybe don't want
Sure.
it in the family because they don't want to cause problems, or even sometimes the kids aren't interested in the same way. So maybe instead of selling it, they're able to kind of have their legacy and story continue on.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I'm sure a lot of them do feel that way. Well, we gotta get you up to the next year's football fantasy football expo with us in Canton, and maybe use you to tour us around, give us some personal tours and guides through the
That'd be
football Hall of
fun.
Fame. That'd be awesome. We'll
That'd be
get you up there. We'll figure out a way. Keep
I
your
love it.
schedule
I love it.
open next
I
August.
got next August,
So-
definitely.
so let's kind of bring you into the present. Where are you now? What are you up to? I know you've got your own media company that you've been working on for the last few years, and you've built that up. In the world of museums and curation, what have you got going on right now?
Yeah, so I do a little bit of everything. As you mentioned, I run Swick Media, swickmedia.com, and it started again as social media. We did a lot of I realized when I was at one of my museums, we would spend so much money outsourcing to a large company or an agency, and 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't even do it the way we wanted. So it got to the point where I was like, I want to learn how to do some of this. So I think it started just to kind of make it easier on me that I could design an exhibit and get it all print, and skip the middleman and send it to printing. So actually the last exhibit I did at the Hall of Fame was completely designed by me. We bought the lockers and then we were able to fill the lockers. And I believe we were hosting SEC Nation, or excuse me, yeah, the SEC, SEC Media Days. And so each locker had memorabilia from each of the schools in the SEC. And the boards had the list of the Hall of Famers, and it was just a really fun experience. But I've actually, last year in 2022, I moved back to Wisconsin, which is where I'm from. I'm at the Wisconsin Black Historical Society as their archivist, and really taking a lot of the skill sets I've learned at the last 4 or 5 museums and finding a way to work in the African American community and really just share that story, show what we all have to offer there. And it's been a really exciting and real rewarding experience, not only to be home, but doing something that I felt continued to have value, and maybe, I wouldn't say, an underrepresented area community. And it's just exciting to kind of bring that life and showcase what we all have. Going off that, I really miss sports. I miss talking with athletes. And so earlier this year, I started my podcast, Into the Unknown. And it really just documents and shares people's personal journeys and stories and experiences. And I think for me, being a historian by trade, I've always found interest in people's stories and learning more about who people are and how they got there. I think a lot of times when we see athletes or, leaders in government or teachers or, you name it, it almost feels like they've always been there. And one of the goals of the podcast is really to dive deeper and understand where they came from and, the experiences they had to get them to the level of success that they have today. Going off that, I didn't want it to be just players or just coaches. And so it really was an opportunity to open to a wide variety of everyone from, I had my 7th grade social studies teacher on the podcast, which was,
Nice.
a lot of fun for my friends growing up to see that interaction. I've had
Awesome.
teammates that I played rugby with, and really everyone else in between. It's just, I feel like everyone has a story, and it's been fun to share that.
Yeah, I especially love the title because, being that you're a historian and you have all this knowledge of things past, and present, nobody can see into the future. And so I listened to a few of your episodes, and the best part about it was kind of toward the end where you're always kind of like, okay, well, what's next? And, that's like a hard question to answer for a lot of people. And it's such a broad idea to think of, like, what could be next. And a lot of times we don't even know ourselves. And so it leaves it really kind of open ended, which is kind of cool. I kind of like that. There's like this unwritten ending to the show. So I highly recommend it for those of you that haven't checked it out. So, Jeremy, if people want to reach out to you, if they have some questions or looking for advice to maybe get into the field that you've done, or maybe they're looking to get some help with your media company and looking to work with you, let us know how they can find you. And I'll make sure everybody that we put all this information in the show notes, and so they can, and with links and everything, so they can reach out to you. But is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience today? To give them some advice or maybe some words of encouragement if they're looking to get into your field or maybe do some of the things that you've done in the world of sport?
Absolutely. So just where you can find me, swickmedia.com. You can find me at The Average Historian on almost every social media platform. I believe I'm at RealJSwick on Twitter. And then for the podcast, it's at pod.intotheunknown on pretty much all social platforms as well. As far as advice, man, I think one of the biggest things is finding something you really enjoy and doing whatever you can to keep doing that, even if you're not, maybe getting paid for it right now. But if it's finding you happiness and it's finding you joy, finding ways in your day to kind of keep pursuing that in whatever way possible. It might be scrolling on Instagram or Twitter and just kind of, X. It might just be scrolling and just finding things you find interesting. or if you're working in if you're interested in the museum field, reaching out to a university or a museum and seeing if you could possibly volunteer. I mean, volunteer once a month, once a week, maybe, periodically, or maybe for a specific event, just to kind of get your feet wet and learn a little bit more about that field. Again, I think one of the great things I've learned about the museum field is a lot of people who are in it love to talk about it and love to kind of share pieces of advice. You can find me on LinkedIn, just type in Jeremy Swick. And if you have any real museum questions or how I got started, or ideas to continue to improve, or just get your foot in the door, feel free to reach out. I'm more than willing and interested to talk to people. And I think it's just really just keep pursuing what you're enjoying in life.
Yeah, and again, I'll make sure I have all that information in the show notes, everybody. So if you're looking to reach out to Jeremy, or you just want to check out some of his content on his podcast and on his media company, I'll make sure all that stuff's in the show notes. Well, Jeremy, you had some awesome stories to share, some really cool experiences. I am not a history person, but I appreciate the memorabilia and all the history that comes attached with it. I mean, to be honest, if I could have, I probably would have spent all day in the Hall of Fame just going around by myself, looking at all the different exhibits and reading all the different tags. I've been to basically all the Hall of Fames, with the exception of a few. Especially the major sports, I've been to all of them. And I would love to get back there by myself, uninterrupted, and go through all of the displays and read as much as I can. I think for me, the one that really stuck out the most was the Wayne Gretzky exhibit at the Hockey Hall of Fame up in Toronto. I mean, the amount of stuff that they had from his collection from when he was a young kid with all the score sheets and everything just blew my mind. And it was just so cool to see, because he's such a godlike figure in the world of hockey. And I'm a fan of every sport, but and that was just something that, stuck out at me. But the Football Hall of Fame, I have to say, they did some wonderful things over there. And they're still doing some wonderful things over there to really bring it up to speed and modernize it. And that exhibit I had mentioned earlier, with the locker room and the Vince Lombardi virtual reality thing, was out of this world. That was so cool. I could have sat there all day and watched it on replay.
Oh, 100%.
So
I have to laugh.
It's a very cool
I
world.
have to laugh. You mentioned that. We were actually, right towards the end of my internship there in 2016, we were some of the beta testers on that. We got to set it and watch it, and it was just really cool because it was still a work in progress, but it was one of those things that was like under construction, but they're like, all right, come in here. We need some test dummies to tell us what you think. And me being from Wisconsin, I ate the Vince Lombardi part up, and it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. I won't ruin it for people that haven't been there yet, but it's definitely worth going to. Totally worth the time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Jeremy Swick, awesome stuff there. It's kind of a little bit of change of pace for us here at the Injured List podcast, but it's good to have some fresh things to talk about and some really different things to talk about as well. So, Jeremy, thank you for joining us. Hope we can talk with you again soon, and thanks for coming on the Injured List podcast.
Thanks again, Brian. I appreciate it.